So you fancy growing a bit of rhubarb, do ya? Don't we all, mate? Now rhubarb is a great vegetable. Vegetable, not a fruit. I know some people think it's a fruit, but it's not. That's because rhubarb crumble and it's usually used in desserts. It is a vegetable. You eat the shoot. Don't eat the leaf because the leaf's poisonous. It's the big shoots we're after. The best thing about rhubarb is it comes back every year. It's a perennial. But what you've got to remember is there's certain things you're going to have to get in place in order for you to get this reoccurring perennial crop every year. What I would suggest is, dig down and prepare your bed nice and deep with lots of well-rotted manure and compost to get them in a good situation so they've got enough nutrients there to give you a good crop. Now you've got two real ways of doing this. You can grow these from seed, but if you do grow your rhubarb from seed, you're probably going to have to wait quite a long time to get a crop, probably 4 or 5 years. Your best bet and the most common bet, although it is a bit more expensive, I mean look, if you've got loads of time on your hands and you want to do a big operation, grow it from seed. Long 5-year planning, sow a big number of them, do it economically, grow them on, get them strong, plant them out. But of course, once you've got a few established rhubarb plants, it's all the juice is in the roots. So you would usually use a crown, something like this, which is basically just a dissected piece of or divided existing plant root, basically of rhubarb. Now, trust me, I've been to the moon and back with this sort of thing, right? If you buy crowns, when you see them in that packet, have a good look, know what you're doing. Get in there early Feb to your garden centres and get these crowns. Make sure it's got some bulk to it and it's got a shoot, a clear shoot. Here, look. Something that actually looks like it's alive, because the longer they sit in that bag and dry out, or the water they have the heating on in the garden set, they dry out. I've been there. Don't do it. It's a waste of money. They're about £4. These. This one I think's worth it. This one's going to get going straight away. Give us something decent. So prepare your soil really well. Try and, I'd cover this by about an inch compost on top of that, and then I'd have an inch of mulch on top of that as well. The thing with rhubarb you've got to watch out for is weeds. You don't want other perennial weeds. Make sure there's no perennial weeds when you plant this stuff, all right, because you're going to run yourself into problems. Now, you plant this crown in the ground, as I've discussed, but what you've got to remember is you can't harvest this for the first season. Alright, you've got to let this grow now, and then next year you can crop it lightly. But it doesn't matter how many years you grow your rhubarb, you've got to crop it up till about July and then leave it. Let it and never annihilate all the stems on the plant. Always leave a few small ones on. You don't want to obliterate it, you want to crop it gently throughout the year. That way you're going to get more recurring crops out of it, and that's really what you're going for, rhubarb. So after sort of July time, let it grow on a bit, let it store some sun's energy for next year's crop. When I was younger, I moved to a house and there was an established clump of rhubarb, and what I decided to do was move it, because I wanted to dig a wildlife pond where the rhubarb was, and I decided to move the rhubarb into a more sort of linear sort of drift in the garden. And what I found was I couldn't believe it the next year. The leaves and the foliage, I just could not believe it was 10 times what that original one plant was in the corner. And why that is, every 5 years you're supposed to move your rhubarb, because what will happen is it will use up all the nutrients specific that the rhubarb likes in that one area. So every 5 years you should lift it, divide it, move it on. And it's especially good if you've got a big area, because obviously you can multiply it until you've got quite a lot of it. So there's just something for you to think about. You can have a productive rhubarb for about 10 years in one position, but after 5 years, it will start to deplete the nutrients in that area. So that's something you want to think about. Now, I want to tell you a little bit of a story now Many years ago I did a landscaping project, and I walked into the garden and he had like an apple orchard at the bottom of the garden, and it was full of rhubarb on the ground level, 50% shade. And I've never seen rhubarb with stems as big as my arm. Literally, I said to him, I said, do you want that rhubarb down there, mate? And he was like, no, get rid of it. We harvested, me and my mate, we must have harvested about 5 big sacks of the stems. And we dug out the crowns and we potted them on and gave them to friends or whatever. But I always wondered, I'd never seen rhubarb grow that well. I've never even seen commercial projects where it grows that big. And I wondered if there was some symbiosis going on with the apple trees. Now, I don't know. I have heard you need 50% shade for these, so maybe it was the shade. But I've got to say, it was like a dappled sunlight on that rhubarb. And I don't know, there are instances where certain things grow well with other certain plants. So what I'm doing today is I'm in my forest garden and I'm around the apple trees I've got, and I'm going to plant some. Most things in gardening is about experimenting, finding things out by mistake. That's how the most greatest discoveries happen, is a mistake. It's always important to be critical, walking around the garden, look at other people's gardens. That's doing well there. Look, oh, it's around there. Have a little look at the situation, and I'm tempted to see what happens here. You know, this part of the forest garden's a little bit bare, so I would love to have a nice ridge, a big, well, like that rhubarb I saw in that guy's garden that year. I'll be very interested to see how this does in comparison to where I've planted rhubarb in other parts of the garden. Because let's make no mistake, if you plant this stuff, you can do everything right, but sometimes I've had it where it grows really well in the first year to the point where you're like, oh, I want to crop that, it looks, you know. Another times where it's on its 3rd year and I'm like, do you know what, I've done everything right here, but it just doesn't look right. So I'll be very interested to see how this does. Leave any comments if you've heard of anything like this before, or you know anything specific about rhubarb, growing rhubarb that's done really well for you or someone else you know. So basically I've dug a nice plot here. I've got a wheelbarrow of compost, dug it into the soil, got a nice deep bed. I'm just going to plant this. So all you've got to remember is get your chute covered, you know, put some mulch over it, give it a good water and see how you get on. Cover it with a bit of mulch. And when your rhubarb gets established in a few years, it's going to look a little bit like this bad boy behind me. So a couple of other things you want to look out for. They do better where they've got a consistent moisture content in the ground. These actually come originally from Siberia, so they come up quickly early in the season and flower. There was actually a documentary recently about a couple that were living in the wild of Alaska, and they were actually growing this stuff in the forest, in a clearing, and it was surrounded by grass. They hadn't even weeded the grass out and it was growing quite well. So it's a very, very robust plant. The one behind me here, this is 4 years old now. This is doing very well, very, very well. It's actually a follow on this video. 2 years have gone by since I put that other crown at the edge of the forest garden. It didn't actually do that well for the first year or two. There just basically wasn't a lot of fertility in the soil. So what I've done now is I put some chicken pellets on it last winter, and this year it has perked up a little bit. But you've got to remember, when you put things like rhubarb in the ground, it takes a little while for the roots to build up a bit of strength. So you want to give them the best chance you possibly can. And the soil we've got here is actually very, very shallow. You only have to dig down a few inches and you're on chalk and flint, because we're up here in the Chiltern Hills, and it's still growing very, very well. But what I would say is just give them the best you can, a nice fluffy soil, organic matter. It's going to be in the ground for a while, so put your compost and make it nitrogen rich, and mulch them as well. They do good with a good mulch. So it is a good crop. The ones I planted under the apple trees are doing well. The furthest you can plant them away from the root mass of the other trees though, however, they'll grow a lot better. Like there's one there that's doing particularly well. But for the permaculture garden, this is a fantastic crop, and they look really, really nice as well. Very, very ornamental. So if you want to combine
if you've got a smaller garden, crop growing with flower beds, this is a great way of doing it. And it's also a great ground cover. It will crowd out the weeds, and it will shade out all of the weeds. So it's just a fantastic crop, rhubarb. And I'm going to go in there now, and I'm going to harvest some shoots, and I'm going to make the famous rhubarb crumble. Perfect. So this is it, my first time making the old crumble. Let's give it a go.
Right, so I hope that helps. Growing rhubarb, a great perennial vegetable. Get out there and grow some!